Last spring, I invoiced $11,000 in a single month. The month after that, I brought in less than $2,000. That's freelance income for you, and for years, it convinced me I'd never be able to build any real financial cushion. Not because I was careless with money, because the money itself never showed up the same way twice. I edit video for a living, corporate clients, the occasional documentary project, a couple of retainer clients who pay on their own schedule, which is to say, whenever their accounting department feels like it. Some months I'd get paid the day I sent an invoice. Other times I'd wait 6 weeks. My income, averaged out over a year, was decent, somewhere around $58,000. But averages don't pay rent on the 15th if the client hasn't paid you yet. 14 months ago, I had $612 in my checking account, and a growing sense that stability just wasn't something people in my line of work got to have. Do I want to walk you through what actually changed that, because it wasn't a raise and it wasn't landing some huge client that solved everything. It was realizing that the way I was thinking about saving was built for someone with a completely different kind of income than mine. The first thing I tried was the obvious thing. Every time an invoice got paid, I'd move 15% of it straight into a separate account. Simple percentage, applied consistently, right at the source. It sounded airtight. It fell apart almost immediately for a reason I hadn't considered. My expenses didn't care when my invoices landed. Software subscriptions renewed on fixed dates. My editing suite, storage, a couple of stock footage libraries. They all billed on the 1st and the 3rd of the month, whether or not a client had paid me anything that week. So there'd be stretches where I had plenty in savings but nothing in checking, and I'd end up pulling money back out just to cover a subscription renewal. Then a big invoice would land. I'd save 15% of it and feel good for about 4 days. Then something would eat into it again. After about 10 weeks of that, I checked my savings account and found $385 in it. I'd moved over $1,000 into that account across the same period. Most of it had already come back out. That's when I stopped thinking about the 15% rule and started actually looking at the shape of my income instead of the total. I pulled up every invoice I'd sent in the past year and mapped out not the amount but the gap. The average time between sending an invoice and getting paid was 26 days. Some clients paid in a week. One consistently took closer to 2 months, and my expenses, unlike my income, were almost entirely predictable. Software, insurance, a portion set aside for taxes I was supposed to be paying quarterly, and mostly wasn't. The insight wasn't complicated, but it took me embarrassingly long to see it. I was treating irregular income as if it needed an irregular saving strategy. It needed the opposite. It needed something completely disconnected from when the money actually arrived. So I built what I started calling a baseline. I picked an amount I could pay myself every month, regardless of what came in, based on my lowest earning months from the previous year, not my average. That number came out to about $3,100. Everything I earned went into one holding account first. From that account, I paid myself the same $3,100 on the 1st of every month like a salary. Whatever was left in the holding account after that stayed there, building a buffer for the months that would inevitably fall short. The first 2 months, the buffer barely grew because I was still catching up from the mess the 15% method had left behind, but by month 3, something clicked into place that hadn't before. A slow month came, one of the genuinely bad ones, under $2,000 in new invoices, and for the first time I didn't feel it. I paid myself the same $3,100 anyway, straight out of the buffer, and nothing broke. That was the actual turning point, not a specific dollar figure. The moment a bad month stopped being an emergency. Once the baseline was holding steady, I did what I'd been avoiding for 2 years, which was actually sit down and audit every recurring charge tied to the business. It wasn't a fun afternoon. I went through 8 months of statements and business expenses line by line, and a lot of it was stuff I'd signed up for during a deadline crunch and never looked at again. I found I was paying for 3 separate cloud storage services because I kept forgetting I already had one and signing up for another under pressure. That was costing me $61 a month I didn't need to spend. I found a stock footage subscription I'd used exactly twice in 8 months, another $39 gone for nothing. And I discovered I'd been consistently underpaying my quarterly estimated taxes by a wide enough margin that I was going to owe a real penalty the following spring if I didn't correct it. That last one wasn't a small oversight. It was the kind of thing that could have quietly undone half a year of saving in one bill. Fixing the subscriptions was easy. Canceling 2 of them, downgrading a third saved about $90 a month immediately. Fixing the tax situation was less pleasant because it meant increasing what I set aside every month by roughly $200, which effectively lowered my baseline pay to myself. It didn't feel like progress at the time. It felt like a pay cut I'd given myself for no reason, but it meant I stopped building a hidden liability that would have wiped out months of saving the moment it came due. With the subscriptions trimmed and the tax problem handled, the buffer started growing at a steadier pace, somewhere around $900 a month on average, some months more, some less, depending on how the invoices landed. 6 months in, the buffer had grown to just over $6,000. Then my main computer died. Not a slow decline, just gone. The kind of failure where a repair shop looks at it and quietly tells you it's not worth fixing. For someone who edits video for a living, that's not an inconvenience. That's the entire business stopping in the middle of a project. With a client waiting on a delivery date I now had no way of hitting on my own machine. A replacement with the storage and processing power I actually needed for the work came out to just over $3,200. 2 years earlier, that expense would have ended everything I'd built. I'd have gone right back to zero. I probably would have put part of it on a card and spent the next 4 months digging out, all while trying to catch up on the work I'd missed. Instead, I paid myself my baseline that month exactly like normal, and the equipment cost came out of the buffer separately, as its own line item, not as a crisis touching everything else. The buffer dropped from around $6,000 down to just under $2,800. I remember being mildly annoyed about it. I don't remember panicking, which for me was new. The months after that were quiet, honestly a little uneventful in a way that used to make me anxious. Back when uneventful felt like the calm before something going wrong. I kept paying myself the same baseline. I kept letting the surplus build without touching it or trying to accelerate anything. There was a temptation more than once to raise the baseline itself, especially during a run of strong months where the holding account had far more sitting in it than I needed. I didn't. I let the buffer absorb the good months the same way it had absorbed the bad ones, instead of adjusting my lifestyle up every time work picked up. 14 months after I started with $612 and a computer that hadn't yet died, the buffer sitting behind my baseline had grown to just over $14,000. My actual average income across that period hadn't meaningfully changed. Some months were still $11,000, some were still under $2,000. What had changed was that those swings no longer touched my daily life at all. None of this came from a single clever decision. It came from separating when I got paid from when I paid myself. It came from finally looking closely enough at recurring costs to catch the ones that had gone invisible. It came from correcting a tax mistake before it turned into an emergency, and then it came from doing something genuinely unglamorous for months at a time, which was nothing. Just letting the system run without fiddling with it. If you're dealing with income that doesn't arrive on a predictable schedule, whether that's freelancing, commission work, or anything seasonal, the percentage of each payment approach is probably going to fail you the same way it failed me. Start by mapping the actual gap between when you earn something and when it lands in your account. Then figure out the lowest realistic income you'd expect in a rough month and build a fixed payment to yourself around that number, not your average. Route everything through one account first, and let that account absorb the unevenness so your daily spending never has to. And when the unexpected expense eventually shows up, because with irregular income it always does eventually, let the buffer do exactly what it was built for. That's not a setback. That's the entire point of building it in the first place.